Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of NetSupport Radio. I'm Maggie Layfield, and I'll be your host for today. Our guest with us today is a nationally recognized author, speaker, and mental health advocate who has spoken at over 800 conferences and schools in the United States. You may even recognize him from some of the interviews he's done on NBC, CBS, or Fox. Tom Thelen was a victim of bullying as a teen, but thanks to one teacher, he learned how to break out of the bullying cycle and live a life of positive mental health. And as a result, he's authored Mental Health 101 for Teens and founded No Bullying Schools, an evidence-based bullying prevention program. So welcome, Tom. We're so glad to have you with us today to chat about mental health and well-being and stopping bullying in our schools.
Well, thank you, Maggie, for having me on. It's good to be here today.
Awesome. Well, I know as I introduced you, is quite the background. So I always like to start with a little bit of information about who you are and kind of where you're coming from. So you were unfortunately a victim of bullying when you were younger as a teen. How do you go from that to now being a nationally recognized speaker and a motivator for students?
Well, I think back to that one teacher who helped me, and a big realization way back when was it's a mindset thing. If I feel like a victim, if I stew on it and hold on to the anger and hurt, it just only weighs me down. Mm-hmm. And so who am I hurting more by becoming bitter? I'm really hurting myself. And then just getting help, like as a teen, that was a huge, there was a stigma about mental health. Imagine that. Now, I know we don't have that today. Well, yes, we do. But I think it's gotten to be a little bit better. There's a little bit less stigma around the topic of mental health. Mm-hmm. And of course, let's really be clear, every teen goes through, I feel depressed this weekend, or I felt anxiety last night about a test. But I was going through longer periods of that where I really did need to get help. And so I got counseling as a teen, and it slowly turned my life around. It wasn't overnight. But I started giving, I really being proactive about my response ahead of time. So I'm like, you know what, I can walk away from this. Or there were certain things I was able to maybe laugh at or make a joke back. Mm-hmm. But the important part for me was if I was to be bullied or someone tries to get at me, it's like, don't let them see it in the look of my eyes. And that teacher of mine, that English teacher who helped me, was also my speech and debate coach. So I'm one of those geeky speech and debate guys. But she always said, Mrs. Burdick was her name. She always said, if you want to touch the heart, speak from the heart. So she always, if she really wanted to make an impact, she had an edge of vulnerability to her, and certainly 100% authentic, Mm-hmm. And that's the gift, to give that to, especially to be able to give that as an adult to a younger generation. And so that's kind of my sort of core strength that I think I bring into schools is I'm going to say, this is really how it was when I was a teen. And here's how I actually got help. And here are the changes that I made. So, but to your question about how did I kind of become a speaker? I remember after college, I was working at this acoustical engineering firm. I'm doing their marketing. And it's like, I really want to speak to teens again. In college and a little bit after college, I had worked with some nonprofits that worked with teens. I'm like, I miss that. I don't want to be, some people, it's like, that's the last thing they want to do is like you speak to 500 teens in the gymnasium. But I was missing that type of thing. I never experienced it at that level. Mm-hmm. And so I started writing a book, and it was called Teen Leadership Revolution. It had one chapter in there about the bullying I had gone through. And when I did eventually start getting into schools, asked me to speak, they're like, come speak, but don't speak on the leadership stuff. Speak on the bullying part. I'm like, that's only one chapter of the book. Yeah, and so that was really the starting point. And that was 2012. So going into my 11th year doing this full time. And you know what they say, if you do something you love, it doesn't feel like work.
That's amazing. And I love that you were able to take something that was a negative in your life and obviously flip it around for a positive and be able to impact so many people. And you mentioned that there's this big stigma around mental health, and there's certainly still, I think, a continued stigma, although it's being talked about a lot more today. And one of the things that we're noticing is that the pandemic in particular, it really exposed just the cracks in our system, especially in education, when it comes to student mental health and well-being and the support that's being provided for them. So now that you're back and you're talking with schools again, and kind of you're getting back into things after that gap that was COVID, what are you hearing from students and the challenges that they faced during that time, or kind of the repercussions they're facing as a result of the kind of isolation that everyone was feeling from being separated so long from their friends, from their teachers, from that support system they were used to having?
Well, it was huge. What has happened, and still is happening through the pandemic. So in the United States, in the first year of the pandemic, they measured, they being the CDC, so the Centers for Disease Control, they measure lots of things. One of the things they measure is how many people come to the emergency rooms around the country, and why are they there, and how old are they? And so they measure things like, why do teenagers show up for the emergency room for attempted suicide? And that statistic blew up during the pandemic. So in the first year of the shutdown, March 2020 to March 2021, for teenage girls ages 12 to 17, the CDC recorded a 51% increase in a single year. It's never jumped that high. Interestingly enough, they only recorded a 3% increase in ER visits for attempted suicide for young men. We kind of talk about that and speculate a little bit, but at 3%, you could see that year to year, almost any year that's kind of within the margins, but 51% is incredibly alarming. A few thoughts on that. So, number one, girls, if they tend to bully one way or the other, they tend to bully more socially. So here you have social media, the only way they're communicating. And so bullying does happen even more amongst girls on social media. Guys are more physical and even verbal. Of course, everybody's verbal. And now that the verbal and the social bullying, of course, ties into cyberbullying. In our book, Mental Health 101, this lady here, Dr. Curling Neely, pointed out to me on one of our calls. She said, well, think about the young men. One of the reasons, of course, you can never know for sure why it was only 3%, but one of the reasons, sadly, that it was 3% is some of those young men who attempted to hurt themselves and end their life, some of them actually did end their life. Yeah. And so they didn't end up in the ER. They weren't on that statistic at all because they had ended their lives. So we know that kids were in crisis during the pandemic. We know that the current state of mental health in schools is pretty under-resourced. And that's a complicated thing to say, because sometimes if you talk about mental health in schools, people will jump to the conclusion, oh, you're just saying every kid has to have a counselor, every kid has to have a school psychologist. And we're not saying that. It's, for one, it's impossible, because you have the rate of students to school psychologists is like 1,400 students in the United States to one school psychologist. So then school counselors, it's almost 500 kids to one school counselor, which means a lot of school counselors go between buildings. The school psychologists, of course, go through the buildings, and they can only barely keep up with sort of the most severe cases of mental health and behavioral things in the schools. So that's where our nonprofit said, what can we do about the rest of the student body? Is it because it's not like they all need like professional counseling, or they all need to talk to that psychologist and have an IEP, individualized education plan. But they all do need to have skills for, like, what do you do when somebody sends you this mean, aggressive text? Or how should you respond if someone sends you like a nude photo? I mean, there's so many sort of, average real life situations that kids are not being trained for. And so who's going to train them? They're just going to pick it up through the ether? Are they, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes. And there's so many adults that they never dealt with that. They don't know how to help the kids who are experiencing. They're like, I don't know what I would do if someone sent me a photo that was explicit, or if someone started doing that to me, because it's almost like brand new for everybody all at once. And they're just feeling it more heavily than we are as adults in many cases.
I was just in California last week, and after I did a school assembly, and then I did a parent program that evening. And afterwards, I stick around and hang out and talk to the parents, whoever wants to talk. A lady came up to me in tears. She said, my husband and I can't get on the same page because we don't have the same standard about how much we should be involved in our kids' social media lives. He doesn't want to be involved at all. That's their thing. They'll have to learn. They'll have to stumble and fall and become resilient over time on their own. And she's saying, well, but they're not ready for that yet. The example she gave is their young teenage daughter was sent a full frontal nude picture, otherwise known as a dick pic. And it's like, you've got one mom saying, we need to limit the screens. We've got another, and then the dad doesn't agree, and they're just going different directions. And my take on that, my wife and I have teens. We have a 16-year-old daughter, 14-year-old son, and we have 12-year-old daughters, twins. It's like, look, as long as you're under our roof, I know this is annoying to you, but we still have some influence in what happens on your phone. And even our 16-year-old daughter, she has to have her phone down on the counter overnight. We monitor her screen use. From time to time, we even say, hey, can we look at your phone? And we're able to look and see what she's been up to on that with her girlfriends and her boyfriend and all of that stuff. Because look, until she flies the nest, I still have some responsibility there. And I think not that we've solved it all, not that the parents need to do it just like us, but this is the parental conundrum, the parental challenge of this generation.
Mm-hmm. And what to do with those things. And I think you really hit the nail on the head, because there's that line between some parents on privacy. It's my kids. I don't want to invade their space. It's like the 1980s reading your kid's journal. And should mom go in there and read what's written in the diary, or should you stay out of it, versus that desire and that need as a parent to protect your students, to be able to look after them and make sure that they're not putting themselves in negative positions. And we're finding that schools are also walking that strange line of we don't want to interfere in your personal lives, but while you're under our roof, while you're part of our system, we're also responsible for you. So they have to try and find the level of ownership of what can they do, what can't they do. And one of the things you talk about is obviously developing resiliency and obviously giving them the skills. So when these things happen, not if, but mostly when they happen, the students are prepared to deal with them. What does that really look like for schools today? If you're talking about being more proactive versus reactive, what should schools really be aiming to do so that it's not okay, this has happened, but more of a, before it happens,
Right.
How can we get in front of this?
Right. So the worst thing they can do is bury their head in the sand and be like, we hope it works out. And that sort of was the trend maybe 5 or 6 years ago. The trend was schools would say, okay, we can only hold these kids responsible for phone, digital communication if it happened while they were on our campus. Well, the trend now is we can only hold them accountable for digital stuff that affects the campus, which that's a better policy, right? Because if a kid goes home and they're just super aggressive to somebody at their own school, and school counselors can talk to that aggressive kid or talk to the kid who said some hateful thing, why not nip that in the bud rather than just say, not our responsibility. You did it after hours. And so we want schools to track that kind of behavior. And we think that, students are sort of the first line of defense in that. Like, we're never going to be able to keep up with all the new apps and all of the activity. And because we can talk about this later or whenever, but the amount of time kids have online is way more than what's recommended. And it's almost constantly besides their school hours, especially high schoolers. But if that is affecting school relationships, we want them to report that to their parents and to their school. So with our company, No Bullying Schools, we developed an app that it's not just the app is actually called Report Bullying, but we realized very quickly we need to allow all of these other types of behaviors that need to be reported beyond bullying. So for example, what if my buddy talks about hurting themselves or they're cutting, or like that's an at-risk behavior? Or what if somebody is saying, I'm really depressed, and that's like maybe a mental health concern, is what we'd call that. So we categorize it the best we could, and then we allow schools to track that behavior over time. And we really want them to be able to look year over year and say, did we over time have less confirmed incidents of bullying? And that's something we haven't really seen. Like we did a bunch of research of there's a lot of reporting apps or anonymous reporting apps, but we wanted to say beyond just the report, how do we let the school delineate between what's reported and what is a confirmed report of bullying or harassment or at-risk behavior or the something else category, which could include mental health, any type of concern, maybe even if you felt like your friend was being abused or neglected. So educators are mandatory reporters of that kind of stuff. Let's let the kids then help us see out the blind spots.
That is so helpful because oftentimes they're hearing things and they know what's going on way before we do, way before teachers do, and they're concerned about their friends. They don't want their friends to have something bad happen to them, but they don't often know where to go or who to talk to. So having tools in place like what you're talking about allows them to have avenues to communicate without maybe feeling like they're tattling on somebody or that they're getting someone in trouble. But also, like you said, on the back end, the schools can then track and figure out how are we trending, what's going on, are we seeing an influx, decrease, of what's happening, and then being able to address it before it skyrockets out of control or something really bad happens as a result of that.
Yeah, in schools, if you're a school administrator, which you have been throughout your career, not every report of bullying is a bullying incident. Sometimes it's what is called a peer conflict. Or other times, maybe 2 or 3 kids may report the very same incident. And so if you don't delineate and say, well, that's a duplicate of another report, here you might have 75 reports throughout the year or 200 reports. And it's like, but what's the real picture there of our campus? What really happened? What was confirmed? What couldn't be confirmed? Another category, what about incidents that we had to turn over to the authorities? There's when kids are sending a nude image back and forth, it's automatic. They have to involve the authorities. So the school doesn't necessarily know what happens with the student after that because of privacy reasons. And so we're trying to paint basically the most clear picture we can of school culture, what's really happening based off of what the administrators really know after they've investigated an incident.
Exactly. And that school culture, especially, I think, is an important topic because you, as administrators, as teachers, we're responsible for how our school feels to our students. Is it welcoming and is it inviting? Is it a place where you feel comfortable? Do you feel scared to go? Do you feel like you're getting help? Are you being pushed away? And you mentioned, obviously, the idea of a no bullying school, which is the ideal, a place where you walk in and zero bullying happens. But we know that's not really ever going to happen because we're people and we're mean and we are spiteful, and teenagers have hormones that are mixed in with there, especially too, and even younger kids, that there's some natural things that happen. So when you're talking about becoming like a no bullying school, what does that really mean? Like, what's the objective we're aiming for instead of obviously getting rid of it completely?
I mean, I agree with you. There's no perfect school and no perfect person. And so schools will always deal with this. But so at nobullyingschools.com, we have a couple of example videos of the curriculum that we give to kids. And we have this like kickoff week, which you can also do as like a kickoff month, like one video a week, or you could do like 5 days in a row. And they're about 15-minute videos where myself and another person named Jordan Carson, we present, first of all, what is bullying and cyberbullying and how should we respond? But then we present this sort of positive school culture challenge. And we ask each class to think of these cool projects they could do to make people feel welcome on campus. Because we're not just trying to say, just put a stake in the ground and don't do the bad thing, but do the good thing, do the positive thing. And at the end of that week, or the end of those 5 videos, we have all the kids sign this banner, and it says we're a no bullying school, which means collectively we say no to bullying. So you want a kid to be in an environment where they go, you know what, there's people that speak up for me, or there's friends that come to me afterward and check on me, or there's teachers that care enough to ask me why I'm looking depressed today. And so we have them all sign that banner, and No, they know it's not going to be a perfect school environment, but if they can say, I'm going to be part of the positive side of it, that's a huge step. Because kids, this is what a lot of times they think. They say, well, this doesn't apply to me. I don't get bullied, and I have not been a bully. So there may be that middle 80, 90% of kids are kind of in the middle. And it's like, but don't just be a boat anchor. Don't be dead weight at your school. So speak up for someone and befriend them after the fact. Check on them, see if they're okay, or report something that you've seen when you need to, and help somebody get help. And so we think that in school culture, everybody can take the next positive step.
Mm-hmm. I love that, because everyone has a responsibility, but then also everyone has the ability to then help and be part of the positive solution, as opposed to sitting back and, letting the problem happen, or just going, oh, that's not me. That's not my thing. And we see a lot of schools these days, social emotional learning, or SEL, is becoming, it's trendy, but trendy in the right way, in the sense that it's now kind of helping to break the stigma of understanding that people are more than just the body that sits in the classroom, but it's a whole person. It's asking them, are you okay? How was your weekend? What's going on with your family? Recognizing when there are issues, but then also teaching students to recognize those emotions in themselves, see them in others, being empathetic and compassionate, plugging in the right way. I think it was you and I who were talking about in a previous conversation, the idea that, gym class didn't used to be a thing that they make kids do. And now every school in the US does gym. And, you were advocating for that we should almost have a mental health class in the same way that students should be taught these skills. Because I didn't learn, I don't naturally know how to play badminton. I didn't learn how to play tennis, but I figured it out in gym class, and then you get to go. So is that something you feel like schools could do? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No,
go ahead.
There was data that said, okay, when these kids take gym, it helps more than just their body. It's not like we call it PE, physical education. Oh, maybe it just helps them physically, but it actually helped them socially and academically. So they got to point. It's like everybody should take gym. And I always think about it in the opposite way, or the weird, the what if. So like, what if they would have just way back, 30 and 40 years ago, and they would have said, the only kids who have to take gym are kids with a physical disability or kids with physical ailments. So like me, I have asthma and allergies. It's like, you're taking gym. Now imagine, you got 10, 20% of the student body has to take gym, and they're like this weird stigma about it. Like, oh God, I'm not one of those kids, one of those weirdos that takes gym. But there isn't that in real life, because everybody just takes it. Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel about the mental health system in schools. It's like right now, at least in the United States, schools only address mental health as an after the fact. Okay, this kid is struggling, or this kid's struggling with behavior, or they have had, anxiety or depression. And so at that point, when it's already a concern, they try to maybe stop something that is negatively affecting that kid's academic performance. So we're saying, and then how could you build up the positive of the rest of the kids? And like I said, not every kid needs professional counseling or psychology, but every kid does need to know how to respond when somebody is instigating something with them, or how to be more resilient. And so when we wrote this book here, Mental Health 101 for Teens, we said this has to be just as much about building positive behaviors as it is about preventing maybe at-risk behaviors.
Taking the dual approach of, obviously, kind of both sides of things. So maybe you're not leaning towards this way, but then you could always develop and become a better person, build those positive skills. And like you talk about, the resilience of understanding how to handle it if you are thrown into one of those situations, versus, oh, now you're in the deep end, try and swim. Let's pull you out with the limited tools that we actually have available. So,
and when to get help, because, kids, they feel so isolated, even now that COVID is a little bit in our rearview mirror. Kids still, and I think I can relate to this, even, back when I grew up, feeling like, man, I feel like I'm the only person, or I feel like I'm the weirdo because I'm going through a tough time with my parents. And then you get out of high school, and you out of college, or you're older, and you look back, you go, oh, wait a minute, I think basically everybody was going through a roller coaster, and we were all kind of pretending that we were cool and it was fine. And I didn't have social media as a teen. I'm 42 years old. Back then, I just sort of knew what I saw. Now kids, see everything else and pretty much the positive highlights of all their friends' lives. And so it's easy for them to assume that that other kid's life is positive 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Or even to fall down the opposite rabbit hole and to fall into groups of kids who are super depressed and are hurting themselves. And now you're in that group. And now the phone knows the algorithm of you like that kind of post. And so it feeds you more of that. That's very scary as a parent.
That's terrifying. Yes, I have 3 little ones, much younger than yours, but I think about already, what life is going to be like for them in 10 years, what's going to be out there technologically, and I'm already falling behind on everything anyway. I don't follow like all the apps, so I have no idea what it's going to look like. But I feel encouraged about the idea that I might not know what things are going to happen 10 years from now, but I do know that if I teach them the right skills now, that resiliency, understanding how to handle bad situations, making them feel comfortable that they can come talk to me or come talk to a trusted adult if something bad happens, then no matter what new technology or weird things get thrown at us, they're going to have coping skills to be able to handle those situations and be able to know what to do, whenever they're faced with something that's a bit challenging or that's unexpected and puts them in a weird path, shall we say. So
you're training them to come to you when they have a question. I mean, like that should be the baseline, for all families is you've got these supportive parents are saying, hey, when you have a question, when you don't know about sending a post, come to me, but we know that's not the case with all kids. And that's where, when I go to schools, I think to myself, there's a certain percentage of these kids that come from a real huge disadvantage. And I think the biggest disadvantage a kid can have is to have an unsupportive home. So you go back to that, and then your life is chaos. And then you bring, all of that into the school, and you learn to not trust adults, and you hold on to your secrets. And as they say, you're only as strong as your secrets. So teaching them to rely on you at a young age is really important. There's times where you can help your kid get maybe more professional help if needed, or maybe you can just help them understand the social situation, put it in context for them so they can navigate through it, because they're not necessarily ready to.
No, they definitely are not. So, and I think we prepare them for so many other things. We have to teach them how to hold a spoon. I'm doing that with my kid right now, who's a couple months old. How to walk, how to do things. All these things that we naturally just teach our kids. We don't just assume they're going to pick up on their own. We can't just assume they're going to pick up, good mental health habits, good skills for coping and for handling negative situations. And what you mentioned obviously is not all kids come from a supportive home, and that kind of circles back to your story of that you, not that necessarily you didn't come from a supportive home, but you had a teacher who saw a need, who was there for you, who became that trusted person, who didn't just assume you're getting what you needed from home, but reached out in a time when you really needed it most, and it made all the difference for you. So I feel like that's 100%. Something that any school can do right now is just reach out, try and provide people with that guidance, or let them know that someone cares about them and that they're there to help support them no matter what.
The interesting thing that I had happen connected into what you're saying is I had an educator say to me when I was doing a teacher training about our program. So it was a school, a different school in California, in the Bay Area, that they're using this book, and there's a curriculum that goes with it. They're using that for all of their ninth graders. And so then after speaking to those teens that day, I spoke to the educators and training them how to use the curriculum. And one of the educators during our Q&A says, hey, we're not all counselors here. I wasn't trained to be a counselor. I'm not trained. And, it's another adult. I'm not going to just say, hey, now. But I said, I understand your concern. And I do. It's like, but we're not asking you to be that, right? It's a stay in your lane conversation. So not every adult can or should be a licensed psychologist or counselor and take kids to that level. But where are those missing link parents and missing the link between a kid in crisis and a kid who gets help? That's what I want to be to kids in my neighborhood. That's what I want teachers to look for in schools, is because they need that caring adult who can get them, if needed, maybe back to mom and dad to talk, or if needed, maybe to professional help, through mom and dad's support. But every kid, even from a supportive home, needs more caring adults in their life than just what's at home. So where is the heart at the schools to do that? And I think most educators have that heart, but they just are wondering, well, where's the line? What do I do? How do I help them?
Completely. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the stay in your lane. We think, okay, that's not my job. And educators are very overwhelmed as it is. They have a lot of things going on. So they think, oh no, another thing I have to do. But there's always that teacher that everyone knows where the kids love to go to his or her class and just hang out. And it's not because, they're doing anything special other than just making a safe space and letting kids know that they're welcome to be there. And like you said, it bridges that gap between, the kids who are in crisis and then the kids who actually get the help. And it's not the teacher providing the help necessarily, but they're able to provide that link to get them to the point that they then can go ask for help, that they know where to go, that they get guidance towards that when they're not quite sure which direction that they need to take in order to help themselves get out of the problem that they're in.
I was at a school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where after doing a whole school assembly, they had also asked me to do a separate small meeting with their student leader group. Plus the school administrators are going to be there and school counselor. And we were talking about what can they do to be leaders and creating a more positive culture in their school. It was really interesting because they had about 3 or 4 leaders from each of their 4 grades. It was a high school. And one of these kids, like in 10th grade, and they've already been at this school for a year and a half, said, I didn't even know that our school counselors were available to talk to us for more than just like career stuff. I thought it was just career. Isn't it just career? They're like, no, it's more than that. And if you're in crisis, and so if you've got your leader kids confused about why are my school counselors available? I mean, they are there for career stuff too, right? But isn't just that. And so it's like, man, if the kid in the leadership team is wondering that, how many other kids are wondering?
Making sure that everyone knows exactly what resources they have and where they are, not just assuming, oh yeah, school counselor, you can go talk to her about whatever, because like you said, they have assumptions. They come in thinking this person's just here to help me on my ACTs, or they're just here to like help me find the right college. And it's like, not that kind of counseling. There's lots of different kinds of counseling available.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, there's even the idea of having sort of mental health checkups with kids. I mean, if you were able to, if you had maybe a little more staff at a school that were dedicated to mental health, they would be able to not just sort of triage kids who are in mental health crisis, but they would also be able to get a pulse on kids' just general well-being and say, hey, how can we build on that? And I again come back to the idea between the comparison of physical and mental health is such a great parallel, because you look at healthy people who are physically healthy, and they don't just go to the doctor when they're sick. They actually spend time proactively building their physical health, and they go to the gym. And so, what is the positive mental health skills that are built at schools? Right now, I see that as a giant void. And that's why we're hoping there's more social emotional learning in schools. To circle back to one of your earlier questions, it's like, on the one hand, there are districts where it's becoming more popular, maybe even a buzzword. On the other hand, there are states here in the United States that are saying, wait a minute, we don't want any social emotional learning in schools. This is a new trend, like within the last year, where they're saying, wait a minute, a lot of these programs, we're suspect that they're going to try to indoctrinate our kids to some political agenda and that sort of thing. And maybe there are some programs like that, but it's like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so still find a way to teach those skills in schools in a way that's universal. It's not controversial to teach kids how to be respectful or to be more responsible or more resilient. And so you can do that in a way that no parent will disagree with, saying, how are you respectful to your peers? How are you respectful to your authority when maybe you missed the mark, you didn't bring in your homework and you want to be snarky? And so I'm really a little bit concerned about that new trend, assuming that social media, that social and emotional learning is always politicized or always has an agenda. Because I think there's plenty of programs, including ours, that every parent would say, yeah, I actually want more of that in my kid's life, even back here at home.
So let's talk about filling the void then, because obviously you do have a wealth of resources and tools that schools and even parents can take advantage of to be able to help them. So would you mind sharing with us a little bit about what's out there? What can people turn to? Where can they find this content if a school wants to start taking the initiative or a parent wants to take the initiative and start helping build more resilient students, more well-rounded, shall we say, students who are going to create these no bullying schools that I think we'd all love to see?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you letting me take a little time to do that. I mean, we have two main tools that we use with schools. One is nobullyingschools.com, and that's where kids can report any type of behavior. It gets tracked, and we track not just reported incidents, but confirmed incidents. And the neat thing about that tool is it shows the difference over time. So it compares this school year to last school year, automatically calculates the percentage of increase or decrease per behavior type. So, and that's just in a private dashboard that the administrators get. The kids can submit a report anonymously. They can leave their name. There's a spot, would you like to leave your name? We hope they do, but sometimes they need to report anonymously. And so that's a big piece of it. And then our other tool is the curriculum we've developed with Mental Health 101. So we have a whole teacher's guide that goes with our book where teachers who are not necessarily mental health experts, or they're not licensed, but they're licensed educators. They go through each chapter with the kids, and they do activities in the classroom. They go through a chapter a week. They have these fun activities they do, and we try to keep it at like an appropriate level of sharing. So we want to make it kind of fun. We want to make it an open environment, and we want them to know that they can talk to their parents about their struggles, and there are trusted adults like their teacher, like their school counselor, they can come to when they're having questions or in crisis. So at the end of each chapter, we have a take-home sheet for the families. This is the thing I'm actually most proud of. It's a family discussion guide, and we had those translated into Spanish and Chinese for some of our English as a second language students, and not just for them, but for the parents who may just speak Chinese or Spanish in the home. And so it's a one sheet, it's like this chapter was on resiliency. And so you could send the kids home with a sheet, or you email it out through the school communication system. And it's basically like 4 or 5 bullet points. They learned these things. And then here's 4 or 5 discussion starters for you and your kid on the drive home from school,
Awesome.
at the dinner table. And, my wife and I want resources like that, even in our own home. We don't have it all figured out. We never will. Our kids, just like every kid and every teen, has the disadvantage that our kids, my wife and I, our kids live with imperfect parents, which is difficult for a kid because we as parents are holding them to a standard of behavior, and yet we ourselves are not perfect. And so there's times where we overreact, or there's times where I have to say, hey, I'm sorry about yelling earlier. But as we build that relationship, it strengthens our kids to be able to withstand sort of the storms of life. And I see that as another gaping hole in schools. Is the category they call that is parental engagement, or parent and guardian engagement, or they say this family engagement. So give schools a tool that says this is how you can connect more to your parents. And if it's not practical, if it's not easy to use, if it's not like what you see is what you get, just poof, the harder it is to use, the less likely they are to adopt it. So we try to keep it simple.
It's the best way to go. We find the same thing with any educational technology. Don't make it hard, make it smart, make it easy. And people are generally a lot more keen to pick it up than to put it down. And this is a topic where you really can't afford to not do something, because it could make the difference between, we talked at the beginning, the statistics of a student who goes to the ER and one who never gets there because they harm themselves to that extent. And we definitely want to stop that from happening and help build stronger, more resilient students who are also much more positive, who are supportive of their peers, and who ultimately, are much more engaged and much more mentally healthy, which is the ideal for all of us, I think, to get to that point.
To tie into that, when a kid has harmed themselves or harmed someone else, it really gets very serious very quickly for schools. And, we designed, say, no bullying schools. We designed that for the administrators to keep a pulse on behavior and to track kids' behavior over time, as I said. But one of the sort of extra benefits that we found is schools were saying, we like this because it shows that we're being proactive about these issues. We have schools that get sued by parents over, hey, bullying was happening, but you did nothing. You weren't proactive enough. It's like, well, there's a report form in the office at the school. They could have reported at any time, but they didn't. And there have been schools in the United States that have been successfully sued by parents of kids who have been either bullied and left the school, or kids who have even ended their own lives. And they've been able to say the school didn't do enough to stop it, or they weren't proactive enough to prevent it. And it's like, that's sort of the CYA element of it, is like, but I mean, don't we want to know that our schools are being proactive? Don't we want to know that they're not just doing the bare minimum? There's not just like some paper in the office that a kid has to go in and like make a big deal about filling it out. And don't we want to know that we're actually trying to prevent the at-risk behaviors before they happen? I mean, yes, strong security through companies like NetSupport, strong securities on these devices. And I'm for strong security in schools. My neighbor across the street is a school resource officer, also known as a school cop. I think that's awesome. He's a super cool guy. Kids connect with him. I'm all for that too. But let's not just be there for stopping the crisis or the big school shooter event. Let's like help these kids before they turn into that.
Exactly. I love it. We have to be more proactive. There's things we can be doing, earlier on, even when they're younger, just helping them to get the help that they need so we don't get to that point. And ultimately, helping all of us to feel like we've done something to positively impact the student rather than having to react later on when it's possibly too late to actually jump in and solve the problem.
Right. Exactly. We don't want to just clean up a mess. We want to prevent messes.
I love that.
We'll have to tell that to your younger kids at home.
Yeah, we don't just want to clean up. We want to prevent the messes. That's why we pull the cup back from the edge of the table rather than leaving it there waiting for the elbow to knock it over, which has happened many a time in my house, let me tell you. But
it's the whole, you have that whole ring around the chair of like half of the food that was on the plate ends up on the floor. Those years are not that far behind me.
I know even in the teenage years, they still make quite a mess. It's just a lot bigger and a lot more things strewn about everywhere else. So, bless you. And I hope it's going well. So, Tom, we have enjoyed having you here, being able to share with us about what you're doing to positively impact students. We greatly appreciate your time and the resources. I'll have us pop up those resources one more time on the screen so people know where to go. And if you're listening to the podcast and not watching the podcast, then you can visit mentalhealth101.org to be able to learn more about what you can do, what kind of things you can put in place in your school, in your home to help support your students' mental health. But thanks again, Tom, for joining us, and we appreciate having you on today.
Thank you, Maggie. It's been great.
Thanks, guys, for joining us. We'll catch you next time on NetSupport Radio. Bye.